The crimson sun hung low over the Montana horizon as Ryder Calloway reined in his dappled gray stallion at the crest of Harper's Hill. His weathered Stetson pulled low against the autumn glare. The orchard spread out below him like a dream from his past, the familiar rows of apple trees now heavy with fruit, their branches bowed in submission to the season's bounty. 15 years had passed since he'd last set foot on this land, yet the memories remained as fresh as the mountain air that filled his lungs. Montana Territory, 1878. The world had changed, and so had Ryder. The carefree boy who'd once stolen kisses between apple trees was now a hardened man of 34, with calloused hands and eyes that had seen too much death on battlefields both official and unnamed. The war between the states had claimed his youth, and the years of drifting afterward had claimed nearly everything else. As Ryder nudged his horse forward down the winding path toward Hartwell Orchard, he told himself he was merely passing through. That curiosity alone had drawn him back to this place. He'd heard in a saloon 3 towns over that old man Hartwell had passed on last winter, and something in that news had stirred an ache he thought long buried. The horses' hooves crunched against fallen leaves as they approached the white wooden gate that marked the orchard's entrance. The painted sign hanging above it, Hartwell Apples, had faded with the years but remained otherwise unchanged. Ryder dismounted, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. He looped the reins around the gatepost and paused, suddenly uncertain. What was he doing here? What did he expect to find? The answer came as his eyes drifted toward the eastern section of the orchard. A slender figure moved between the trees, reaching up to pluck ripe fruit from heavy branches. The late afternoon sun caught in her auburn hair, setting it ablaze with golden highlights as it had done so many autumns ago. Abigail. She wore a simple blue dress and white apron, her sleeves rolled to the elbows as she worked. A large wicker basket sat at her feet, already half filled with apples. Even from this distance, Ryder could see she moved with the same grace she'd possessed as a girl of 18, though she'd be 33 now. His throat tightened. He hadn't prepared himself for this moment, hadn't truly believed she would still be here, still be unmarried. But then, he hadn't asked anyone about her specifically. Perhaps she was married, and this was merely her family's orchard now. Ryder's hand went instinctively to his shirt pocket, where he carried the small silver locket he'd meant to give her the night before he left. The night he'd promised to return within a year. A promise broken by war and circumstance, and if he was honest with himself, his own failings. He removed his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, now threaded with gray at the temples. Then, before he could reconsider, he pushed open the gate and stepped onto the property. The familiar scent of ripening apples enveloped him, so potent it nearly brought him to his knees with remembered joy. How many autumn days had he spent here in his youth, working alongside Abigail, stealing moments of laughter and tender touches when her father wasn't watching. Abigail hadn't noticed him yet. She was singing softly to herself, a melancholy tune he didn't recognize. Her voice carried on the breeze, and Ryder found himself rooted to the spot, afraid to move forward and break the spell, afraid to retreat and lose this moment forever. Then she turned, reaching for another apple, and their eyes met across the distance. The basket slipped from her grasp, spilling apples across the ground. Her hand flew to her mouth, and even from where he stood, Ryder could see the color drain from her face. "Abigail," he called, his voice rougher than he intended. She didn't move, didn't respond. For a terrible moment he thought she might flee or worse, dismiss him entirely. Then she took a single step forward. "Ryder." Her voice was exactly as he remembered it, clear and sweet, with that slight lilt that had always made his name sound like a song on her lips. He crossed the distance between them slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished. She didn't. She stood her ground, her eyes those remarkable eyes the color of summer sage never leaving his face. When he reached her, he stopped, leaving an arm's length between them. Up close, he could see the changes time had wrought. Fine lines at the corners of her eyes, a maturity to her features that had replaced the girlish softness he remembered. But her beauty had only deepened, like a fine wine aging to perfection. "You came back," she said simply, her voice betraying no emotion. "I did. 15 years too late." There was no bitterness in her tone, only a statement of fact. Ryder nodded, unable to deny it. "I know." She bent to retrieve the fallen apples, and after a moment's hesitation, he knelt to help her. Their hands brushed as they reached for the same fruit, and both withdrew quickly, as if burned. "Your father," Ryder said carefully. "I heard he passed last winter. I'm sorry, Abigail." She placed the last apple in her basket and straightened. "Thank you. It was peaceful, at least. He went in his sleep. The orchard looks well tended. I've kept it going." Pride flashed in her eyes. "It's mine now, all of it. You never married." The question escaped before he could stop it. Something flickered across her face, pain, perhaps, or anger. "No," she said simply. Then, with a directness that was new to her, "Why are you here, Ryder, after all this time?" He had no ready answer, no carefully prepared explanation. "I don't rightly know," he admitted. "I was passing through, heard about your father. I suppose I wanted to see for myself that you were all right." "I'm all right," she said, picking up her basket. "I've been all right for years." The dismissal was clear in her tone, but Ryder wasn't ready to leave. "Not yet." "Abigail, it's getting late," she interrupted. "I need to bring these in before dark." She turned toward the farmhouse that stood at the edge of the orchard, its white clapboard walls pink in the setting sun. "Let me help you," he offered, reaching for the basket. She hesitated, then allowed him to take it. "Just to the house," she said firmly. "Then you should be on your way." They walked in silence through the rows of trees. The orchard had expanded since Ryder had last seen it, with at least 20 new trees planted in neat rows along the western edge. "You've added to it," he observed. Abigail nodded. "Father and I planted those 5 years ago. They're winesaps. They do well in this soil. Your mother's favorite." She glanced at him, surprised he remembered. "Yes." They reached the porch steps, and Ryder set the basket down carefully. The house looked much the same, though the paint was fresher, and a new rocking chair sat beside the old one on the porch. "Thank you for your help," Abigail said formally. "Good evening, Ryder." He knew a dismissal when he heard one, but 15 years of regret made him bold. "Abigail, I owe you an explanation." "You owe me nothing." Her voice was steady, but her hands gripped her apron with white-knuckled intensity. "What was between us is long past." "Is it?" He searched her face, looking for any sign that she felt even a fraction of what still burned in his heart. For a moment, her composed facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of raw emotion beneath. "It has to be," she whispered. Then, more firmly, "Goodbye, Ryder." She turned and climbed the steps, disappearing into the house without a backward glance. The door closed with a soft but definite click. Ryder stood in the gathering dusk, his hat in his hands, the weight of all he'd lost pressing down on him like a physical burden. He should leave, he knew. Ride away and let Abigail continue the life she'd built without him. But his feet refused to move. Instead, he found himself walking toward the barn at the far side of the property. It had been expanded too, he noticed, with a new addition on the northern side. The door stood partially open, golden lamplight spilling out into the twilight. Ryder approached cautiously, uncertain of his welcome. From inside came the sound of movement, the soft nickering of horses, the rustle of hay. He paused at the entrance, then called out, "Hello." A figure emerged from one of the stalls, not Abigail, but a young man, perhaps 16 or 17, tall and lanky with a shock of dark hair. He carried a pitchfork and wore an expression of wary curiosity. "Can I help you, mister?" the boy asked, his voice caught in that awkward stage between childhood and manhood. "I was looking for a place to stable my horse for the night," Ryder said, improvising. "I saw your light." The boy leaned his pitchfork against a post. "We don't take boarders generally, but I reckon one night wouldn't hurt. Where's your mount?" "Tied at the front gate. Gray stallion named Drummer." "I'll fetch him for you," the boy offered. "You can wait here if you like." As the young man headed toward the entrance, Ryder studied him more carefully. There was something familiar in the set of his shoulders, the way he moved. "What's your name, son?" Ryder asked. The boy paused, glancing back. "Robert Hartwell." The surname hit Ryder like a physical blow. "Hartwell? You're kin to Abigail." "She's my mother," Robert replied, a note of pride in his voice. "You know her?" Ryder struggled to keep his expression neutral as his mind raced. Abigail had a son who would have been conceived shortly after Ryder left for the war. A son with dark hair, and now that he looked more closely, familiar gray eyes. "We're old acquaintances," Ryder managed. "I knew her many years ago." Robert nodded, accepting this without question. "I'll be right back with your horse, Mr. Calloway, Ryder Calloway." Something flickered in the boy's eyes, recognition, perhaps, but it passed quickly. "Won't be but a minute, Mr. Calloway." As Robert left the barn, Ryder's legs nearly gave out. He sank onto a hay bale, his mind spinning. Could it be the timing would be right? And there was something in the boy's features, in the set of his jaw. The sound of approaching footsteps brought him back to the present. Robert entered, leading Drummer by the reins. The horse seemed content, ears forward with interest at his new surroundings. "Fine animal," Robert commented, stroking the stallion's neck. "Army-trained," Ryder nodded. "Cavalry, you know horses. Been around them all my life." The boy led Drummer to an empty stall and began removing the saddle with practiced ease. "Mother says I could ride before I could walk properly." Watching the young man work, Ryder felt a strange mixture of pride and loss. If his suspicions were correct, he had missed his son's entire childhood first steps, first words, first ride. "Your father teach you about horses?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Robert's hand stilled briefly. "Never knew my father," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "He died in the war before I was born. Died in the war." The words echoed in Ryder's mind. Abigail had told her son, their son, that his father was dead. "I'm sorry to hear that," Ryder said quietly. Robert shrugged, continuing to care for the horse. "Can't miss what you never had, I suppose. Besides, grandfather was good to us, and mother," he smiled fondly, "mother is strong enough for two parents." "She certainly is," Ryder agreed, his throat tight with emotion. After settling Drummer with water and feed, Robert turned to Ryder. "You're welcome to sleep in the hayloft if you'd like. It's clean, and I can bring you some blankets." "That's very kind of you. Mother always says we should show hospitality to travelers." "I should let her know you're staying, though." He hesitated. "Would you like to come up to the house? She usually makes tea this time of evening." Before Ryder could respond, the barn door opened, and Abigail herself appeared, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. Her eyes widened when she saw Ryder. "Robert, go finish your chores in the house," she said, her gaze never leaving Ryder's face. "But mother, I was just telling Mr. Calloway he could stay in the barn tonight. His horse is already settled." "Robert," she repeated, more firmly this time. "The house. Now." The boy looked between them, clearly sensing the tension. "Yes, madam," he said finally, heading for the door. He paused beside his mother. "Everything all right?" She softened slightly, touching his cheek. "Everything's fine. I just need to speak with Mr. Calloway alone." Once Robert had gone, Abigail closed the barn door and turned to face Ryder, her expression guarded. "You need to leave." "Abigail, no." She held up a hand to stop him. "You cannot stay here, not now, not ever." Ryder stood, taking a step toward her. "He's my son, isn't he?" The color drained from her face. "What makes you think he has my eyes, Abigail, my mother's chin, and the timing?" He ran a hand through his hair. "Why did you tell him I was dead?" Anger flashed in her eyes. "What should I have told him? That his father promised to come back but never did? That I waited years with no word, not knowing if you were alive or dead or simply didn't care enough to return?" Her words cut through him like a knife. "I wanted to come back," he said quietly. "God knows I did. Then why didn't you?" The question hung between them, 15 years of hurt compressed into 5 simple words. Ryder sank back onto the hay bale, suddenly feeling every mile he'd traveled, every battle he'd fought. "When I left here, I thought I'd serve my year, maybe 2, then come home to you. I had it all planned." But then Shiloh happened. He saw recognition in her eyes. Everyone knew about the Battle of Shiloh, one of the bloodiest of the war. "I took a bullet in the shoulder, another in the leg. Spent months in a field hospital, fighting infection and fever. By the time I could write, my unit had been reassigned. The letter I sent came back unopened." "I never received any letter," Abigail said, her voice softer now. "After I recovered, I was sent to the Western Territories. Spent 2 years chasing Confederate raiders through Texas and Oklahoma. When the war finally ended, I was a different man, Abigail, broken in ways I couldn't explain." He looked up at her, willing her to understand. "I told myself you deserved better than a man haunted by the things I'd seen, the things I'd done. And then I heard you'd married." "What?" Abigail interrupted, genuine shock in her voice. "Married? Who told you that?" "Jenkins at the general store in Liberty. I wrote to him in '66 asking after you. He wrote back saying you'd married a man named Hartwell." Ryder paused, confused. "But that's your father's name." Understanding dawned on Abigail's face. "He must have misunderstood. Father remarried that year, a widow from Billings. I never married anyone." The revelation settled between them, heavy with implication. All these years he'd believed she had moved on, built a life with someone else. "Robert calls himself Hartwell," Ryder said carefully. Abigail sighed, some of her defensive posture easing. "It was easier that way. Unmarried mothers aren't looked on kindly, even here. Father suggested I use our family name for the baby. It protected us both from gossip." She moved to sit on a hay bale opposite him, keeping distance between them. "I didn't know I was expecting when you left. By the time I realized you were long gone, and then—" She trailed off, her gaze distant. "Months passed with no word. A year. The war dragged on. Eventually, I accepted you weren't coming back. So you told him I died in the war." Abigail met his eyes directly. "It seemed kinder than the truth that I didn't know what had happened to you, that perhaps you'd simply chosen not to return." The accusation stung, but Ryder couldn't deny she had reason to think it. "I never stopped loving you, Abigail, not for a single day." She looked away, but not before he saw the tears gathering in her eyes. "Love isn't just feeling, Ryder, it's action. It's being there." "I know," he admitted. "And I failed you. Failed you both." They sat in silence for a long moment, the only sounds the soft rustling of hay as Drummer moved in his stall and the distant hooting of an owl. Finally, Abigail spoke, her voice steady despite the tears that now tracked down her cheeks. "What do you want, Ryder? Why have you really come back after all this time?" It was the question he'd been asking himself since he first heard of Old Man Hartwell's passing. Why now? What did he hope to gain by returning to a place that had surely moved on without him? Honestly, I don't know, he admitted. I've been drifting for years, taking whatever work I could find: ranch hand, trail guide, lawman for a spell in Arizona. Nothing held me. Nothing felt right. He met her gaze directly. I think maybe I was looking for home. This stopped being your home the day you rode away, she said, but there was more sadness than anger in her voice now. I know that, Ryder acknowledged. I have no right to ask anything of you, Abigail, but I would like to know my son if you'll allow it. She stood abruptly, wrapping her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. I need time to think. It's too much all at once. Ryder rose as well but maintained the distance between them. I understand. I'll go if that's what you want. Abigail hesitated, visibly conflicted. No, she said finally. You can stay in the barn tonight. We'll talk more in the morning. She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at him. Robert doesn't know about us. I need to be the one to tell him when I'm ready. Of course, Ryder agreed. Thank you, Abigail. She nodded once, then slipped out into the night, leaving Ryder alone with his thoughts and the weight of 15 years of absence. Morning came with the soft golden light of early autumn, filtering through the cracks in the barn's wooden walls and rousing Ryder from a fitful sleep. He sat up on the makeshift bed of hay and blankets Robert had provided, his back protesting the night spent on the hard surface. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, he wondered where he was. Then memory returned in a rush: Abigail, the orchard, and most staggering of all, Robert. His son. Ryder rose and dusted hay from his clothes. Through the barn door, he could see the farmhouse, smoke already rising from the chimney. Someone was awake and moving about. He wondered if it was Abigail or Robert, and what either of them might be thinking this morning. He splashed water from a nearby trough onto his face and ran wet hands through his hair in a futile attempt to make himself presentable. Then he checked on Drummer, who seemed perfectly content with his accommodations, before stepping outside into the crisp morning air. The orchard was beautiful in the early light, dew glistening on the grass between the rows of trees. Ryder breathed deeply, taking in the scent of apples and earth and the coming change of seasons. How many mornings like this had he missed? How many autumns had come and gone while he wandered, rootless, across the territories? Movement near the house caught his eye. Robert emerged onto the porch, carrying an empty bucket. The boy, no, young man, Ryder corrected himself, spotted him and waved. Morning, Mr. Calloway, Robert called, descending the steps. Sleep well? Well enough, Ryder replied, walking to meet him. Thank you for the blankets. Robert nodded. I'm headed to the well. Mother's making breakfast if you're hungry. Ryder hesitated. I'm not sure she'd welcome me at her table. She said to invite you, Robert assured him. Said you two had some catching up to do. Something in the boy's tone made Ryder wonder if Abigail had already told him the truth, but Robert's expression revealed nothing unusual as he continued toward the well at the edge of the property. Taking a deep breath, Ryder approached the house. The door stood slightly ajar and the smell of coffee and frying bacon wafted out. He knocked gently. Come in, Abigail called from inside. She stood at the stove, her back to him as he entered. Her hair was pinned up, but a few wayward strands curled at the nape of her neck. She wore a simple dress of deep green, covered by a white apron. Good morning, Ryder said, removing his hat and standing awkwardly just inside the door. Abigail turned, spatula in hand. Her eyes were tired, suggesting she'd slept no better than he had, but her expression was composed. Good morning. Coffee's hot if you'd like some. It was such a domestic, ordinary thing to offer that it momentarily threw him. Thank you, he managed, moving to the pot that sat on the edge of the stove. He found a cup on the nearby shelf and poured himself some of the dark, fragrant brew. The kitchen was warm and inviting, much as he remembered it, though there were changes: new curtains at the window, different dishes on the shelves, a collection of drawings pinned to one wall that he guessed were Robert's work from younger days. "I've been thinking about what you said," Abigail said suddenly, her attention seemingly focused on the bacon she was turning. "About wanting to know Robert." Ryder waited, giving her space to continue. "He deserves to know his father," she said finally, turning to face him. "And you deserve to know him. He's a good boy, kind, hardworking, smart. You'd be proud of him." "I already am," Ryder said softly, "from what little I've seen." Abigail's expression softened slightly. "I want to be clear, Ryder. This isn't about us, about you and me. That's in the past. This is about Robert." The word stung, but Ryder nodded. "I understand. Do you?" She set the spatula down, giving him her full attention. "Because I need you to understand something. If you're going to be in his life, you can't just drift in and out. He's had 15 years of stability. I won't have you disrupting that only to disappear again when the wanderlust strikes." "I won't disappear," Ryder promised. "Not again." Abigail studied him, as if trying to gauge his sincerity. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded once. "I haven't told him yet. I thought perhaps we could do it together after breakfast." The trust implicit in that suggestion wasn't lost on Ryder. "Thank you," he said simply. The door opened, and Robert entered with the now filled water bucket. He set it down near the sink, glancing between the two adults with undisguised curiosity. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Everything's fine," Abigail assured him. "Wash up for breakfast. It's nearly ready." The meal was a strangely ordinary affair, given the extraordinary circumstances. They sat at the round oak table, passing dishes and making polite conversation. Robert asked Ryder about his travels, seemingly fascinated by descriptions of Arizona's deserts and Colorado's mountains. "Have you ever been to the ocean, Mr. Calloway?" the boy asked eagerly. "Once," Ryder replied. "Saw the Atlantic from Virginia during the war. Didn't have much time to appreciate it, though." "I'd like to see it someday," Robert said, a dreamy look in his eyes, those gray eyes so like Ryder's own. "Mother's never been further east than the Dakota Territory." "Perhaps someday we'll go," Abigail said, and then glanced at Ryder with an expression that suggested she hadn't meant to include him in that "we." After breakfast, Robert began clearing the dishes, but Abigail stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "Leave those for now. There's something Mr. Calloway and I need to discuss with you." Robert looked between them, sudden wariness replacing his earlier ease. "Am I in some kind of trouble?" "No, nothing like that," Abigail assured him, gesturing toward the sitting room adjacent to the kitchen. "Let's go sit down." They moved to the more comfortable room, Robert taking the armchair while Abigail and Ryder sat on opposite ends of the small sofa. The boy's expression was guarded now, and Ryder felt a pang of regret that their first real conversation as father and son had to begin with such tension. Abigail folded her hands in her lap, visibly gathering her courage. "Robert, you know I've always told you that your father died in the war before you were born." The boy nodded slowly. "Yes, that wasn't entirely accurate." She glanced at Ryder, then back at her son. "Your father didn't die in the war. He went to fight, yes, but after that I lost touch with him. I didn't know what had happened to him." Robert's brow furrowed as he processed this. "You lied to me." "I thought I was protecting you," Abigail said softly. "And in some ways protecting myself as well. It was easier to say he was dead than to say I didn't know." The boy's gaze shifted to Ryder, sudden understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're—" He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Ryder nodded. "Yes, I'm your father, Robert." The silence that followed felt endless. Robert stared at him, then at his mother, then back at Ryder. A kaleidoscope of emotions crossed his young face: shock, confusion, hurt, and something harder to define. "Why?" he finally asked, the single word directed at both of them. "It's complicated," Abigail began, but Robert cut her off. "No, not why did you lie," he clarified, his gaze fixed on Ryder now. "Why didn't you come back? If you didn't die, why weren't you here?" The raw hurt in the question pierced Ryder to his core. This was the reckoning he had known would come, and he owed his son nothing less than complete honesty. "I was wounded in battle," he said quietly. "Badly enough that I couldn't write for months. When I finally could, my letters didn't reach your mother. After the war, I heard she had married, and I—" He paused, aware that his reasons would sound hollow to a boy who had grown up without a father. "I convinced myself it was better to stay away, to let you both have the life you'd built." "But she hadn't married," Robert said, quick to catch the inconsistency. "No," Ryder admitted. "I was wrong about that. By the time I might have discovered the truth, years had passed. I was ashamed of staying away so long, afraid of what reception I might find if I returned." Robert absorbed this, his expression thoughtful despite the emotion clearly roiling beneath the surface. He had his mother's analytical mind, Ryder realized with a surge of pride. "So yesterday, when you came here," Robert said slowly, "you didn't know about me?" "No," Ryder confirmed. "I came to see your mother, to see the orchard again. Finding out about you was—" He searched for the right word. "It was like discovering a treasure I never knew was mine." Robert's expression remained guarded, but something in his posture eased slightly. "What happens now?" he asked, looking between his parents. Abigail reached across the space between them to take her son's hand. "That depends partly on what you want, Robert. Mr. Calloway, your father, would like to get to know you, but only if you're willing." "And are you staying?" Robert asked Ryder directly. "Or will you disappear again when winter comes?" The boy's perception was unsettling. How many times in the past 15 years had Ryder moved on when the seasons changed, always seeking something new over the next horizon? "I'm staying," he said firmly. "I can't change the past, Robert. I can't give back the years I missed. But I'm here now, and I intend to remain here as long as you and your mother will have me." Robert studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth in his face. Then he nodded once. "All right," he said simply. "All right." Abigail echoed, clearly surprised by her son's apparent acceptance. "I want to know him," Robert said, his gaze still fixed on Ryder. "I want to know where I come from." The simple statement held such weight, such meaning, that Ryder felt his throat constrict with emotion. "I want that too, son," he managed. Robert stood abruptly. "I need to think about all this. May I be excused? The east section still needs harvesting." Abigail nodded, understanding her son's need for space. "Of course, but don't tire yourself." The young man headed for the door, then paused, looking back at Ryder. "Will you still be here when I get back?" "Yes," Ryder promised. "I'll be here." After Robert left, silence settled over the sitting room. Ryder and Abigail sat without speaking, the weight of all that had been said and all that remained unsaid hanging between them. "He took that better than I expected," Abigail finally said. "He's processing," Ryder replied. "It's a lot to take in." She nodded, then rose and began to pace, a habit he remembered from their youth whenever she was troubled. "He's always wondered about you," she admitted. "Always asked questions I couldn't or wouldn't answer." "What did you tell him?" "That you were brave, that you were kind." She paused in her pacing. "That you would have loved him if you'd known him." "I would have," Ryder agreed softly. "I do." Abigail turned to face him fully. "You can't just say things like that, Ryder. Love takes time. You don't know him yet." "I know he's part of you and part of me," he countered. "I know he has your strength and your mind. That's enough to start with." She shook her head, but there was a softness in her expression that hadn't been there before. "You always did have a way with words." Not enough of a way to tell you what was in my heart 15 years ago, he said. If I had, maybe things would have been different. Maybe, she allowed. Or maybe not. The war changed everything for so many people. Ryder stood as well, closing some of the distance between them but still maintaining a respectful space. What do you want, Abigail? Not just for Robert, but for yourself. She looked away, her profile outlined by the morning light streaming through the window. I stopped thinking about what I wanted a long time ago, she said quietly. I focused on what Robert needed, what the orchard needed. And now, she hesitated. Now I don't know. Having you here, it stirred up feelings I thought were long buried. Hope flared in Ryder's chest. What kind of feelings? She met his gaze directly. Complicated ones. Anger, hurt, confusion, and yes, something else too. But I can't just forget 15 years of absence, Ryder. I can't pretend you didn't break my heart. I don't expect you to, he said honestly. I don't expect anything, Abigail. I just want a chance to know my son, and maybe, someday, a chance to earn back some small measure of your trust. She studied him for a long moment, as if searching for something in his face. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slightly. The harvest won't wait, she said, practical as ever. If you're staying, you might as well make yourself useful. We could use an extra pair of hands. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was an opening, a chance to prove himself through actions rather than words. I'd be happy to help, Ryder said. There are work clothes in the chest in the spare room upstairs. They were my father's, but they should fit you well enough. You can change and meet us in the east section. She headed for the door, then paused. And Ryder, yes, this doesn't mean anything beyond what it is. Work that needs doing, hands to do it. He nodded, accepting her terms. I understand. As she left, Ryder found himself alone in the sitting room that held so many memories. The sofa where they now sat was the same one where, as young lovers, they had stolen brief moments together when her father was out tending the orchard. The mantelpiece still held the carved wooden horse he had given her for her 16th birthday, lovingly preserved despite all that had happened between them. Abigail might say his return meant nothing beyond an extra pair of hands for the harvest, but the fact that she had kept these reminders of their past suggested otherwise. There were layers to her feelings that perhaps she herself wasn't ready to acknowledge. Ryder made his way upstairs to the spare room, a small but neat space that overlooked the orchard. The clothes in the chest were indeed a good fit, sturdy work pants and shirts that would serve well for apple picking. As he changed, he caught sight of himself in the small mirror on the wall. The face that looked back at him was weathered by sun and wind, lined with experiences both bitter and sweet. He was no longer the carefree young man who had courted Abigail among these same apple trees. But perhaps the man he had become, tempered by hardship, humbled by loss, was better equipped to appreciate the second chance he'd been given. With this thought in mind, Ryder headed downstairs and out toward the eastern section of the orchard, where his son and the woman he had never stopped loving were already at work among the heavy-laden trees. The next few days fell into a rhythm as natural as the seasons themselves. Ryder rose with the sun each morning, took breakfast with Abigail and Robert, then worked alongside them in the orchard from dawn until dusk. The harvest was plentiful this year, and the three of them moved methodically through the rows of trees, filling basket after basket with ripe fruit. Robert remained cautious around Ryder, but his initial wariness gradually gave way to curiosity. He asked questions as they worked about the war, about Ryder's travels, about what the world looked like beyond the boundaries of Montana territory. "Have you ever shot a man?" Robert asked on the third day as they worked side by side beneath a particularly productive wine sap. The question caught Ryder off guard. He glanced toward Abigail, who was several trees away but still within earshot, her expression suddenly tense. "Yes," Ryder answered honestly. "During the war and after, when I wore a badge for a time." "What does it feel like?" The boy's tone was solemn, his eyes searching. Ryder set down his basket and faced his son directly. "It feels like failure," he said quietly. "Even when it's necessary, even when there's no other choice, it feels like you've failed to find a better way." Robert absorbed this, nodding slowly. "Grandfather said something similar once. He fought at Antietam." "Your grandfather was a good man," Ryder said, meaning it. Despite their differences, he had always respected Abigail's father. "He taught me to shoot," Robert continued. "Said a man should know how to protect what's his, but should never go looking for trouble. That's wise advice." Robert studied him for a moment longer, then returned to picking apples. "Mother says you were a lawman in Arizona. What was that like?" As Ryder described his brief tenure as a deputy sheriff in a small mining town near Tombstone, he was aware of Abigail listening while pretending not to. She had moved closer, her hands continuing their work but her attention clearly on his words. "The desert has its own kind of beauty," Ryder explained. "Different from here, but no less magnificent. The sunsets paint the mountains in colors you wouldn't believe possible." "I'd like to see that someday," Robert said wistfully. "Perhaps you will," Ryder replied. "The world's a big place and you're young yet." "Did you always know you wanted to travel?" the boy asked. Ryder hesitated, glancing at Abigail, who had stilled her hands now, openly listening. "No," he said finally. "Before the war, I thought I'd spend my life right here in this valley, had other plans entirely." "What changed?" Robert pressed. It was Abigail who answered, surprising both of them. "War changes people," she said simply, her eyes meeting Ryder's over their son's head. "It changes everything." There was no accusation in her tone, only a statement of fact. For the first time, Ryder wondered if perhaps she truly did understand why he hadn't returned after the war. Not forgive, necessarily, but understand. The moment was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching from the road. All three turned to see a rider coming up the path toward the house, a man on a chestnut mare, dressed in the manner of a town merchant rather than a farmer or ranch hand. "That's Mr. Patterson from the Mercantile," Abigail said, setting down her basket. "I wasn't expecting him today." She headed toward the house to meet the visitor, leaving Ryder and Robert to continue their work. But Ryder found his attention drawn to the interaction taking place near the porch. The merchant dismounted, removing his hat as he greeted Abigail with what appeared to be more than casual familiarity. "Who is he to your mother?" Ryder asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. Robert glanced over at the pair. "Mr. Patterson. He's taken Mother to dinner in town a few times. Brings her gifts, sometimes ribbons or books. I think he'd like to court her properly, but she always keeps him at arm's length." The information settled uneasily in Ryder's stomach. Of course, Abigail would have had suitors over the years. She was beautiful, capable, and by all appearances, an independent woman of means with her successful orchard. It was unreasonable for him to feel this sharp stab of jealousy after 15 years of absence. Yet he couldn't help watching as Patterson took Abigail's hand in what seemed an unnecessarily lingering handshake. The man was about Ryder's age, well-dressed and prosperous-looking, without the hardened edges that years of drifting had left on Ryder himself. "Your mother never considered remarrying?" Ryder asked, immediately regretting the question as Robert gave him a shrewd look. "She had offers," the boy said simply. "Never seemed interested." Before Ryder could respond, Abigail and Patterson began walking toward them through the orchard. As they approached, Ryder could see that the merchant carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Robert, Mr. Calloway," Abigail called. "This is Mr. Patterson from town. He's brought the account books I ordered." Patterson nodded politely to Robert, then turned a more assessing gaze on Ryder. "Andrew Patterson," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "You're new to these parts?" "Just passing through," Ryder replied, shaking the offered hand perhaps a bit more firmly than necessary. "Helping with the harvest." "Mr. Calloway is an old friend," Abigail added, her tone carefully neutral. "He knew my father before the war." Something in Patterson's expression suggested he didn't entirely believe this explanation, but he nodded politely. "Always good to have extra hands at harvest time. The Hartwell orchard produces the finest apples in the territory. I sell them in my store in Liberty. Mr. Patterson has been very supportive of our business," Abigail explained to Ryder. "He takes most of our crop each year for distribution." "A mutually beneficial arrangement," Patterson said, his smile directed solely at Abigail. "Though I find the company as appealing as the commerce." The deliberate nature of the comment wasn't lost on Ryder, nor was the slight blush it brought to Abigail's cheeks. This was a man staking a claim, making it clear that he had established a place in Abigail's life. "Will you stay for dinner, Mr. Patterson?" Robert asked, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the tension between the men. "Thank you, but no," Patterson declined. "I have business back in town, but I hope to see you all at the Harvest Festival next weekend. The whole valley turns out for it." "We'll be there," Abigail confirmed. "We always are." Patterson took his leave shortly after, but not before pressing Abigail's hand once more and giving Ryder a look that clearly communicated he was aware of the other man's interest and was not intimidated by it. As they returned to their work after the merchant's departure, Ryder found himself uncharacteristically silent. The easy rhythm they had established over the past few days had been disrupted by Patterson's visit, reminding him forcefully that he was an outsider here, a visitor in the life Abigail and Robert had built without him. "He seems prosperous," Ryder finally commented as he and Abigail worked side by side later that afternoon, Robert having gone to fetch more baskets from the barn. "He is," she replied, not looking at him. "His store does well. He's expanded twice in the past few years. And he's interested in more than just your apples." Abigail's hand stilled on the branch she was harvesting. "Is that a question or an observation?" "Both, perhaps," she sighed, turning to face him directly. "Yes, Andrew has made his intentions clear. He's a good man, Ryder, stable, reliable." The implication hung in the air between them, everything Ryder had not been. "And do you return his interest?" he asked, unable to keep a hint of tension from his voice. "I don't see how that's your concern," she said, but there was more weariness than anger in her tone. "It isn't," Ryder acknowledged. "I have no right to ask, no claim on your affections after all this time, but I'm asking anyway." Abigail was silent for a long moment, her gaze drifting toward the distant mountains. "I've known Andrew for 5 years," she said finally. "He's kind to Robert, respectful of me. In all that time, he's never pressed for more than I was willing to give." "That doesn't answer my question." She met his eyes then, a flash of the old fire visible in her gaze. "Because it's not a simple answer, Ryder. Do I care for him? Yes, in my way. Could I build a life with him? Perhaps, but—" She trailed off, seeming reluctant to continue. "But," he prompted gently. "But he doesn't make me feel the way," she stopped herself, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter, feelings aren't everything. Sometimes stability matters more." The unfinished sentence hung between them, tantalizing in its implications. Ryder wanted desperately to press her, to make her complete the thought, but he knew pushing too hard would only make her retreat further. "The Harvest Festival," he said instead, changing the subject slightly. "Tell me about it." She seemed relieved by the shift. "It's a tradition in the valley. Everyone brings their best produce. There's music, dancing, competitions. It marks the end of the harvest season before winter sets in." "Sounds enjoyable." "It is," she agreed. "Robert looks forward to it every year. He usually enters the shooting contest. He has his grandfather's eye." Pride was evident in her voice, and Ryder felt again the acute loss of all the milestones he had missed in his son's life. "I'd like to see that," he said quietly. Abigail studied him for a moment, her expression softening slightly. "You should come with us," she offered. "It would mean a lot to Robert." "Just to Robert?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Perhaps not just to Robert," she admitted. Then, more seriously, "We need to figure out what happens next, Ryder. Robert is getting attached to you despite his best efforts not to. He's never had a father. If you're going to be in his life, we need to establish boundaries." "What kind of boundaries did you have in mind?" "I don't know yet," she confessed. "This situation is unprecedented." Ryder nodded, understanding her caution. "For what it's worth, Abigail, I'm not here to disrupt the life you've built. I just want to be part of it in whatever way you'll allow." She searched his face, looking for what he wasn't sure. "We'll see," she said finally, neither a rejection nor an acceptance. One day at a time. It was more than he had hoped for when he first rode into the orchard days ago. One day at a time. It was a beginning. The Harvest Festival arrived with all the pageantry and excitement Robert had described. The town of Liberty, normally a quiet settlement of a few hundred souls, was transformed by the celebration. Main Street had been decorated with bunting and harvest symbols, and tables lined both sides, displaying the bounty of the valley's farms and orchards. Ryder rode alongside the wagon that carried Abigail, Robert, and their contribution to the festival, several crates of their finest apples and jugs of fresh pressed cider. The past week had seen a tentative easing of tensions between Ryder and Abigail, though they remained carefully circumspect around each other, especially when Robert was present. For his part, Robert had gradually warmed to Ryder's presence, particularly after discovering his father's skill with horses. The boy had a natural affinity for riding that clearly came from Ryder's side, and they had spent several evenings working with the orchard's small stable of mounts. As they approached the town square, Ryder could see that the festival was already in full swing. A band played lively tunes from a makeshift stage, children ran laughing between the stalls, and the air was rich with the smells of food cooking over open fires. "We usually set up near the west end," Abigail directed, pointing toward an open space where other farmers were arranging their displays. Ryder helped them unload and set up their stand, which quickly drew attention from festival goers eager for Hartwell apples. Robert took charge of selling the cider, displaying a natural charm and head for business that impressed Ryder. "He gets that from you," Ryder commented to Abigail as they watched their son confidently make change for a customer. "That ease with people." "Perhaps," she conceded, "though I think it's more his own nature than anything inherited." Before Ryder could respond, a voice called out from the crowd. "Abigail, Robert." Andrew Patterson approached, resplendent in a well-tailored suit that marked him as one of the town's more prosperous citizens. He carried a small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers, which he presented to Abigail with a flourish. "For the Queen of the Harvest," he said with a smile. "Your display looks magnificent as always." "Thank you, Andrew," Abigail replied, accepting the flowers with a polite smile. "We've had a good year." Patterson turned to Ryder, his expression cooling slightly. "Mr. Calloway, still helping with the harvest, I see." Among other things, Ryder replied evenly. An awkward silence fell, broken by Robert's timely intervention. "Mr. Patterson, when does the shooting contest begin? I've been practicing all month." 2 o'clock sharp, Patterson answered, his manner warming as he addressed the boy. "And based on your showing last year, I'd say you're the one to beat." As Robert beamed with pride, Ryder felt a pang of envy for the easy relationship Patterson had established with his son. It was clear the merchant had been a steady presence in Robert's life, perhaps filling some of the void left by Ryder's absence. "Perhaps your friend might like to enter as well," Patterson suggested, with a glance at Ryder that held a hint of challenge. Before Ryder could respond, Robert turned to him eagerly. "Will you, sir? Mother says you were quite a marksman in your day." The "in your day" might have stung if it hadn't been said with such genuine admiration. "I might be a bit rusty," Ryder hedged, "but I'd be happy to try." "Excellent," Patterson said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Nothing like a friendly competition. Now, Abigail, I've reserved a table for the evening meal. I hope you'll do me the honor of joining me." Abigail hesitated, glancing briefly at Ryder. "That's very kind, Andrew, but I should stay with our stand. I can manage," Robert interrupted. "You should go enjoy yourself, Mother. You work too hard." Caught between her son's encouragement and what Ryder suspected was her own reluctance, Abigail nodded. "Thank you, then. I'd be delighted." Patterson's smile broadened into something genuinely warm. "Wonderful. I'll come find you after the contests." As he walked away, Ryder found himself staring after the man with an irrational dislike that he knew was unfair. Patterson had done nothing wrong, in fact. He had been there for Abigail and Robert when Ryder himself had not. "He seems very attentive," Ryder commented, keeping his tone neutral. "He is," Abigail agreed, arranging the wildflowers in a small jar of water. "Andrew has been a good friend to us over the years." There was that word again, friend. But the way Patterson looked at Abigail suggested he hoped for much more than friendship. The remainder of the morning passed in a blur of activity as the Hartwell stand did brisk business. At noon, they took turns breaking for lunch, sampling the various foods offered at the festival. Ryder found himself genuinely enjoying the community atmosphere, so different from the often transient connections he'd formed in his years of wandering. As 2 o'clock approached, Robert grew increasingly excited about the shooting contest. "We should head over to the range," he suggested, practically bouncing with anticipation. "I want to get a good position." The shooting range had been set up at the edge of town, with targets arranged at various distances. A sizable crowd had gathered to watch, and Ryder noted with some amusement that wagers were already being placed on the outcome. "Looks like you're the favorite," he told Robert, nodding toward a group of men who were discussing the contestants. The boy straightened his shoulders, a mixture of pride and nervousness in his expression. "I won last year, but Mr. Jenkins from the Silver Creek Ranch is awfully good." "You'll do fine," Ryder assured him. As they approached the registration table, Patterson appeared again, now holding a gleaming Winchester rifle. "Ah, the Hartwells and Mr. Calloway, of course. Ready to test your skill." "As ready as I'll ever be," Ryder replied, eyeing the merchant's expensive weapon. His own revolver, while well-maintained, showed the wear of years of actual use rather than occasional sport shooting. The contest began with the younger participants, boys Robert's age and slightly older, shooting at nearby targets. Robert acquitted himself admirably, hitting 9 out of 10 targets and earning loud applause from the spectators. Then came the men's competition, with more challenging distances and smaller targets. Ryder found himself standing between Patterson and Jenkins, the ranch hand Robert had mentioned. Patterson's shooting was precise and methodical, clearly the result of regular practice. Jenkins showed the quick, instinctive accuracy of a man who used his weapon for practical purposes. When Ryder's turn came, he felt a moment of doubt. It had been some time since he'd shot for anything other than necessity. But as he raised his revolver, the familiar weight settled in his hand, and his body remembered what his mind had forgotten. 6 shots, 6 hits, each one clean and centered. A murmur ran through the crowd. Even Patterson looked impressed despite himself. The final round came down to Patterson, Ryder, and Jenkins, shooting at the most distant targets. Jenkins went first, hitting 4 of 5. Patterson matched him with 4 hits as well, his last shot just slightly wide. Then it was Ryder's turn. The targets seemed impossibly small at this distance, but he emptied his mind of everything except the task at hand. 5 shots, 5 hits, each one perfect. The crowd erupted in cheers, with Robert's voice rising above the others. "That's my father," the boy shouted, before suddenly falling silent, apparently realizing what he had said. A confused murmur spread through the onlookers. Ryder saw Patterson's expression shift from disappointment at losing to shock at Robert's words. Abigail, who had joined the audience sometime during the competition, stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, her face pale. The judge, oblivious to the sudden tension, approached Ryder with the prize, a silver belt buckle and a small purse of coins. "Congratulations, mister. Finest shooting I've seen in these parts in many a year." Ryder accepted the prize mechanically, his attention on Robert, who looked mortified by his outburst. The boy turned and pushed his way through the crowd, disappearing before either of his parents could reach him. "Robert," Abigail called, starting after him, but Ryder caught her arm. "Let me go," he said quietly. "This is between him and me." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "He might head for the creek behind the schoolhouse. It's where he goes when he's upset." Ryder found Robert exactly where Abigail had suggested, sitting on a fallen log beside the small creek that ran through Liberty. The boy was throwing pebbles into the water, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. "Mind if I join you?" Ryder asked, approaching slowly. Robert shrugged, not looking up. "Free country." Ryder sat beside him on the log, maintaining a respectful distance. For a while they just sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the creek and the more distant noise of the festival. "I shouldn't have said that," Robert finally muttered. "About you being my father. Mother wanted to keep it quiet." "Are you ashamed of me?" Ryder asked gently. The boy looked up, startled. "No, that's not I mean," he struggled to find the words. "I just blurted it out without thinking. Now everyone will know and they'll talk and Mother will be upset." "Your mother is stronger than you think," Ryder said. "And people will talk regardless of what we do. That's the nature of small towns." Robert picked up another pebble, turning it over in his hands. "Why did you come back now? After all this time?" It was the question Ryder had been expecting since the day they met, and he owed his son the most honest answer he could give. "Because I finally found the courage," he said simply. "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Robert. Walking away from your mother was the biggest. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing, that she deserved better than a broken man with nothing to offer." "But you didn't know about me," Robert said, his voice small. "No, I didn't. And that's something I'll regret until my dying day." Ryder sighed, watching the water flow past. "If I had known, nothing would have kept me away. You have to believe that." Robert was silent for a long moment. "That was some shooting back there," he said finally, changing the subject. Ryder accepted the shift. "You weren't so bad yourself. 9 out of 10 is impressive for someone your age." "Could you teach me to shoot like you do, I mean?" The request, so simple and yet so profound in what it represented, touched Ryder deeply. "I'd be honored," he said. Though your mother might have something to say about it. A small smile flickered across Robert's face. Mother worries too much. That's what mothers do, Ryder replied. It's their job. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes more, the tension between them easing with each passing moment. Finally, Robert stood. We should probably get back. Mother will be wondering where we are. As they walked back toward the festival grounds, Robert hesitated, then asked, "Do you think Mr. Patterson will still want to court Mother now that everyone knows about you?" The question caught Ryder off guard. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "That's up to him and to your mother." "Do you want him to?" The boy's perception was uncanny. Ryder chose his words carefully. "What I want is for your mother to be happy. She deserves that more than anyone I know." Robert seemed to accept this answer, though his shrewd expression suggested he understood more than Ryder had said aloud. They found Abigail at their stand, calmly selling apples as if nothing unusual had happened. But Ryder could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful neutrality of her expression that masked deeper emotions. "There you are," she said as they approached. "Everything all right?" "Yes, madam," Robert replied. "I'm sorry about what I said, it just came out." She touched his cheek gently. "It's all right, it would have come out eventually." "Where's Patterson?" Ryder asked, looking around. A shadow crossed Abigail's face. "He had some business to attend to," he said. "I think he was," surprised by Robert's announcement. "I imagined so," Ryder murmured, feeling a mixture of guilt, and if he was honest with himself, a certain satisfaction at having disrupted the merchant's careful courtship. The remainder of the afternoon passed without incident, though Ryder was aware of curious glances and whispered conversations as word spread about Robert's revelation. By the time they packed up their remaining goods at sunset, the entire town likely knew that Ryder Calloway was Robert Hartwell's long-absent father. As they loaded the wagon for the return journey, Patterson appeared once more. He looked composed but serious as he approached Abigail. "A moment of your time," he requested, gesturing slightly away from the wagon. Abigail nodded, following him a short distance away. Ryder busied himself securing the crates but couldn't help glancing toward the pair. Their conversation appeared intense but civil, with Patterson doing most of the talking and Abigail listening, her expression guarded. After a few minutes, Patterson took her hand, pressed it briefly, then walked away without looking back. Abigail returned to the wagon, her face unreadable. "Everything all right?" Ryder asked quietly as Robert climbed onto the wagon seat. "Yes," she said simply. "Andrew sends his regrets about dinner. He has matters to attend to." The ride back to the orchard was largely silent, each of them absorbed in their own thoughts. As they approached the house, Robert finally broke the silence. "I won third prize for my apples," he announced. "Forgot to tell you with all the excitement." "That's wonderful," Abigail said, genuine pride warming her voice. "Your grandfather would have been so pleased." "The judges said they were the juiciest wine saps they'd tasted in years," Robert continued, clearly eager to move past the awkwardness of the day. As they unloaded the wagon and settled the horse for the night, a sense of normalcy gradually returned. Robert, yawning widely, bid them both good night and headed into the house, leaving Ryder and Abigail alone in the yard. "I'm sorry about what happened today," Ryder said, leaning against the wagon. "Robert feels bad about blurting it out like that." "It's not his fault," Abigail replied, her gaze on the stars now appearing in the darkening sky. "We should have been more clear with him about how to handle questions." "And Patterson, did he take it badly?" She glanced at him sharply. "Is that concern or curiosity I hear?" "Both, perhaps," Ryder admitted. "He seems like a decent man." "He is," she agreed. "He was." Surprised, understandably, but mostly he wanted to know if your return changes things between us." "And does it?" Ryder asked, his heart suddenly pounding. Abigail was silent for a long moment. "I don't know," she said finally. "Andrew has been a steady presence in our lives for years. He's reliable, dependable." "Everything I wasn't," Ryder said quietly. "Yes." She didn't try to soften the blow, but she trailed off, seeming uncertain how to continue. "But," he prompted, echoing their conversation from days earlier. "But he isn't you," she whispered, so softly he almost didn't hear it. The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with all the complicated history they shared. Before Ryder could respond, Abigail straightened her shoulders, composing herself. "It's been a long day," she said, her tone shifting back to practical. "We should get some rest. There's still picking to be done tomorrow." She turned toward the house, but Ryder caught her hand gently. "Abigail, wait." She paused but didn't turn to face him. "What is it, Ryder?" "Dance with me," he said suddenly. Now she did turn, confusion evident in her expression. "What? Dance with me?" he repeated. "There was music at the festival, but I didn't get to dance with you." "There's no music here," she pointed out, but she didn't pull her hand away. "We don't need any." He drew her slowly into his arms, giving her every opportunity to retreat. She didn't. Under the vast Montana sky, with only the stars and a quarter moon for light, they began to move together in a slow, gentle rhythm. Abigail was stiff at first, but gradually relaxed against him, her head eventually coming to rest on his shoulder. "I remember the first time we danced," Ryder murmured, his cheek against her hair. "At the Independence Day celebration the summer I turned 18. You wore a blue dress with white ribbons. You remember that?" she asked, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I remember everything about you, Abigail. Every smile, every laugh, every moment we shared. Those memories kept me going through some very dark times." She pulled back slightly to look up at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Then why didn't you come back sooner?" The question was devoid of accusation now, asked with genuine curiosity. "Fear," he admitted. "Not of danger, I've faced plenty of that. Fear of rejection. Fear that you'd built a life that had no place for me. Fear that I'd bring nothing but disruption to your happiness. And now—" "Are you still afraid?" "Terrified," he confessed with a small smile. "But for the first time in 15 years, I'm more afraid of leaving than of staying." They had stopped dancing now, though they remained in each other's arms. Abigail studied his face as if searching for something. "I can't promise you anything, Ryder," she said softly. "There's Robert to consider and years of hurt that can't just be forgotten, but—" She took a deep breath. "But I'd like to try, to see if there's still something worth salvaging between us." It was more than he had dared to hope for. "That's all I ask," he said. "A chance to prove that I'm not the same man who rode away 15 years ago." Slowly, hesitantly, Abigail raised a hand to his cheek. The simple touch felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. Ryder covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press a gentle kiss to her palm. "We should go in," she whispered, though she made no move to step away. "We should," he agreed, equally motionless. For a long moment they stood frozen in the moonlight, balanced on the edge of possibility. Then, with a courage born of 15 years of regret, Ryder lowered his head and gently, reverently, pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was brief, tender, a question rather than a demand. When he pulled back, Abigail's eyes remained closed for a heartbeat longer, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "Good night, Ryder," she said finally, stepping out of his embrace. "Good night, Abigail." He watched as she walked toward the house, her silhouette outlined against the warm lamplight from within. At the door, she paused and looked back at him, a smile ghosting across her lips before she disappeared inside. Ryder remained in the yard, his heart fuller than it had been in 15 long years. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, this was enough, more than enough. It was a beginning. The weeks following the Harvest Festival brought a subtle but significant shift in the dynamics at Hartwell Orchard. With the harvest largely complete, the daily work turned to preserving what couldn't be sold fresh, making cider, drying apple slices, and preparing the trees for the coming winter. Ryder found himself settling into this routine with unexpected ease. Though he still slept in the barn, he took most meals with Abigail and Robert in the farmhouse, and the three of them spent their evenings together by the fire, talking, reading, or simply enjoying each other's company. Robert, having crossed the threshold of acknowledging Ryder as his father, seemed eager to make up for lost time. He peppered Ryder with questions about his life, soaking up stories of distant places and adventures with the enthusiasm of youth. More importantly, he began to share his own hopes and dreams, his desire to someday see the ocean, his interest in expanding the orchard to include other fruits, his talent for sketching that he had inherited from his mother. With Abigail, the changes were more subtle. There were no more kisses like the one they had shared under the stars, but there were lingering glances, brief touches as they passed each other, and conversations that stretched late into the night after Robert had gone to bed. Slowly, carefully, they were rebuilding the trust that had been shattered 15 years before. Patterson had not returned to the orchard since the festival, though Abigail occasionally mentioned seeing him in town when she went to conduct business. From her careful neutrality when speaking of him, Ryder gathered that whatever had been between them was, if not entirely over, at least on hold. As October gave way to November, the first snows dusted the mountains that surrounded the valley. The orchard itself, now bare of fruit and leaves, took on a stark beauty against the landscape. One crisp morning, as Ryder helped Robert repair a section of fence damaged by an early frost, the boy suddenly asked, "Will you be here for Christmas?" The question caught Ryder off guard. He had been taking things day by day, not thinking too far ahead. "Would you like me to be?" he countered carefully. Robert nodded, driving a nail into the fence post with perhaps more force than necessary. "It's always been just Mother and me and Grandfather before he passed. It might be nice to have more family. The word warmed Ryder even as it humbled him. "Then I'll be here," he promised. Robert smiled, a quick flash of happiness before he returned his attention to the fence. "Good. We cut our own tree, you know, from the forest up on Haywood Ridge. It's a tradition. Sounds like a fine tradition." They worked in companionable silence for a while longer before Robert spoke again. "Mother smiles more since you came back," he said, not looking up from his task. "She thinks I don't notice, but I do." Ryder wasn't sure how to respond to this observation. "Your mother is an extraordinary woman," he said finally. "She deserves all the happiness in the world." "Yes, she does," Robert agreed firmly. "Which is why, if you're planning to leave again, you should do it now before Christmas. Before she gets too used to having you here." The blunt statement, delivered with all the straightforward honesty of youth, struck Ryder to the core. "I'm not planning to leave," he said quietly. Robert finally looked up, his gray eyes so like Ryder's own searching his father's face. "People change their minds," he said simply. "They make promises they don't keep." The implicit accusation was fair, and Ryder didn't try to deflect it. "You're right," he acknowledged. "I broke a promise to your mother once, the most important promise I ever made. I can't undo that. All I can do is try to prove day by day that I'm not that man anymore." Robert considered this, then nodded once. "Just don't hurt her again," he said, his voice suddenly older than his years. "She pretends to be strong all the time, but sometimes at night I hear her crying." The image of Abigail weeping alone in the darkness struck Ryder like a physical blow. "I won't hurt her again," he promised, knowing even as he said it that such assurances were easier made than kept. Life had a way of complicating the most sincere intentions. As if reading his thoughts, Robert added, "I'll hold you to that, sir." Despite their growing closeness, Robert still rarely called him father, and never pa or any other more intimate term. The formal address was a reminder of the distance still between them, the years of absence that couldn't simply be erased by a few weeks of presence. "I'd expect nothing less," Ryder replied, respecting the boy's protective stance toward his mother. They finished the fence repairs just as Abigail called them in for the midday meal. As they walked back to the house together, Ryder was struck by how natural it felt, this simple act of heading home for a meal with his family. Family. There was that word again, tentative and hopeful. The afternoon brought a shift in the weather, dark clouds rolling in from the west and the temperature dropping rapidly. By evening, snow was falling in earnest, not the light dusting of previous days but heavy flakes that quickly began to accumulate. "Looks like our first real storm of the season," Abigail observed as they finished supper. "We should check that the barn is secure." "I'll do it," Ryder offered, rising from the table. "I'll come with you," Robert said, already reaching for his coat. Abigail nodded. "Be careful, both of you. It's getting nasty out there." The short walk to the barn was challenging enough, with the wind driving snow into their faces and the ground already slick underfoot. Inside, Ryder and Robert worked quickly to ensure all the animals were comfortable and that no drafts were finding their way through the walls. "You shouldn't sleep out here tonight," Robert said as they finished their tasks. "It's too cold. We have a spare room in the house." Ryder had been thinking the same thing, but wasn't sure how Abigail would feel about him moving into the house, even temporarily. "We should ask your mother about that," he said carefully. "Ask me about what?" Abigail appeared in the doorway, a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders and snow dusting her hair. "Father shouldn't stay in the barn tonight," Robert explained matter-of-factly. "Not with the storm getting worse." Ryder noted with a start that it was the first time Robert had referred to him as father directly to his face. The simple word, spoken so casually, affected him more deeply than he would have expected. Abigail seemed to notice it too, a brief softening in her expression before she turned practical again. "Of course not," she agreed. "The spare room is already made up. I was coming to suggest the same thing." The three of them made their way back to the house, leaning into the wind that had strengthened even in the short time they had been in the barn. Inside, the warmth of the kitchen was a welcome relief from the biting cold. "I'll stoke the fire in the sitting room," Abigail said, removing her snow-dusted shawl. "Robert, show your father to the spare room so he can get settled." The room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small desk beneath the window. It had clearly been Old Man Hartwell's room. A few of his personal items still remained: a pipe stand on the desk, a worn Bible on the bedside table. "Grandfather's room," Robert confirmed, following Ryder's gaze. "Mother hasn't changed much since he passed." "I'm honored she's allowing me to use it," Ryder said sincerely. Robert nodded, then hesitated in the doorway. "Good night, Father," he said, the title still awkward on his lips but deliberately chosen. "Good night, son," Ryder replied. The exchange so simple and yet so profound in what it represented. After Robert had gone to his own room, Ryder took a moment to collect his few possessions from the saddlebags he'd brought in from the barn. Among them was the small silver locket he had carried for 15 years, the one he had intended to give Abigail before he left for war. containing a miniature daguerreotype of himself as a young man. He held it in his palm, wondering if it was finally time to pass it on, or if such a gesture would be presumptuous given the still tentative nature of their reconnection. A soft knock at the door interrupted his contemplation. He quickly pocketed the locket before calling, "Come in." Abigail entered, carrying extra blankets. "The temperature's dropping fast," she explained. "These rooms can get cold at night." "Thank you," Ryder said, taking the blankets from her. Their hands brushed in the exchange, a brief contact that nevertheless sent warmth through him that had nothing to do with the blankets. Abigail didn't immediately withdraw. She stood in the doorway, her expression thoughtful. "Robert called you father tonight," she observed. "He did," Ryder confirmed. "It meant a great deal to me." She nodded, understanding. "He's warming to the idea of having you in his life. We both are." The simple admission, offered without drama or fanfare, felt like a milestone in their careful journey back toward each other. "I'm grateful for the chance," Ryder said quietly. "It's still complicated," Abigail cautioned. "There's so much history between us, so many years lost." "I know," he acknowledged. "I don't expect miracles, Abigail. Just the opportunity to be here, to be part of your lives in whatever way makes sense." She studied him for a long moment, her expression softening. "You've changed," she said finally. "The Ryder I knew before the war was full of restless energy, always looking toward the horizon. There's a stillness in you now, a patience that wasn't there before." 15 years of wandering will do that to a man," he replied with a small smile. "Makes you appreciate the value of staying put." "And is that what you want now, to stay put?" The question held more weight than its simple words suggested. Ryder met her gaze directly. "Yes," he said, "if you'll have me." Abigail didn't respond immediately. She looked around the room, her eyes lingering on her father's possessions. "He would have been glad to see you come back," she said unexpectedly. "Despite everything, he always spoke well of you." This surprised Ryder. "Even after I broke my promise to you, even then," she confirmed. "He said you had a good heart, just young and foolish. And that war changes men in ways civilians can never fully understand." "He was a wise man," Ryder said softly. "Wiser than I gave him credit for as a young man." "Yes, he was." Abigail stepped further into the room, closing the distance between them slightly. "He also said that true love never dies completely, it just changes form sometimes." I didn't understand what he meant until recently. Ryder's heart quickened at her words and the vulnerability in her expression as she spoke them. "And now?" he asked. "Now I think perhaps he was right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I felt for you at 18 was a girl's love, passionate, all-consuming, blind to flaws or consequences. What I feel now is different, deeper in some ways, more cautious in others. But it is love." Ryder hardly dared to breathe as he asked the question. Abigail met his eyes directly. "Yes," she admitted. "Despite everything, despite all the sensible reasons why it shouldn't be, yes." The simple confirmation was more powerful than any passionate declaration could have been. Ryder stepped forward, closing the remaining distance between them, and gently took her hands in his. "I don't deserve your love," he said honestly. "But if you're willing to give it, I promise you I will spend every day trying to be worthy of it." "Don't make promises you can't keep," she warned, though her fingers tightened around his. "The only promise I'm making is to try," Ryder clarified. "Every day for as long as you'll let me." Abigail looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I've missed you," she whispered. "Even when I was angry, even when I told myself I was better off without you. I missed you every day." "And I missed you," he replied, raising one hand to gently cup her cheek. "You were the compass point I always returned to, no matter how far I wandered." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them again, there was a certainty there that hadn't been present before. "Stay," she said simply. "Not just for tonight, not just for Christmas. Stay for good, Ryder. Are you sure?" He asked, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "No," she admitted with a small laugh. "I'm not sure of anything except that I'm tired of wondering what might have been. I want to know what might be instead." It was all the invitation Ryder needed. He lowered his head and kissed her, not with the tentative gentleness of their moonlit encounter, but with the certainty of a man who had found his way home after a lifetime of wandering. Abigail responded in kind, her arms slipping around his neck as she pressed herself against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Abigail," he said, the words simple but heartfelt. "I never stopped loving you, not for a single day in 15 years. "I love you too," she replied, her voice steady despite the tears that now spilled freely down her cheeks. "God help me, but I do." Outside, the storm raged on, snow and wind battering the small farmhouse. But inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Ryder and Abigail had found a haven from the cold, a warmth that had survived 15 years of separation, and now burned all the brighter for having been tested by time and absence. The heavy snows of that night marked the beginning of an unusually harsh winter. For 3 days, the storm raged, piling drifts against the farmhouse and barn, until paths had to be shoveled between them. When the skies finally cleared, the world outside was transformed a pristine white landscape that sparkled in the cold sunshine. Inside the farmhouse, another transformation was taking place. With Ryder now officially moved from the barn to the spare room, the three of them settled into a new routine. Mornings began with breakfast together, followed by chores divided according to ability and necessity. Afternoons were often spent in shared activities, Robert showing Ryder his sketches, Abigail teaching them both how to make her grandmother's famous apple preserves, Ryder sharing stories of his travels that enthralled both mother and son. In the evenings, they gathered in the sitting room. Sometimes Robert read aloud from one of his books. Other times, Abigail worked on her mending while the males played checkers or carved small figures from wood, a skill Ryder had picked up during long nights on the trail, and was now teaching Robert. To an outside observer, they might have appeared to be any ordinary family, comfortable in their domestic harmony. But there were still moments of adjustment, of uncertainty. Robert occasionally slipped back into calling Ryder sir instead of father, especially when tension arose. Abigail sometimes grew quiet and distant, lost in memories or doubts that she wasn't yet ready to share. And Ryder himself struggled with moments of feeling like an intruder in the life they had built without him. Yet with each passing day, these moments grew fewer and the bonds between them stronger. The approaching Christmas season brought new opportunities for connection as they prepared for the holiday together. "We need to cut a tree soon," Robert reminded them one evening in mid-December as they sat by the fire after dinner, "before the snow gets too deep on the ridge." "Tomorrow, if the weather holds," Abigail agreed, looking up from her sewing. "We can take the sleigh most of the way, then walk up to the pines." "I've been thinking," Ryder said hesitantly. "Since this is our first Christmas together, perhaps we could start some new traditions alongside the old ones." Robert looked intrigued. "What kind of traditions?" "Well, when I was in New Mexico one year, I saw how the local families placed candles in paper bags filled with sand luminarias, they called them. They lined pathways and rooftops, and at night the whole village glowed with this warm, welcoming light. "That sounds beautiful," Abigail said, her expression softening at his desire to contribute to their family customs. "Could we do that here?" Robert asked eagerly. "I don't see why not," Ryder replied. "We have plenty of candles and flour sacks could substitute for paper bags." And so, a new tradition was born. The next day, after successfully harvesting a handsome pine tree from the ridge and setting it up in the sitting room, they spent the afternoon preparing luminarias. Robert proved particularly adept at cutting decorative patterns into the sacks that would allow the candlelight to shine through in shapes of stars and moons. As dusk fell, they placed the luminarias along the porch railings and down the path to the gate, lighting each candle with ceremonial care. Stepping back to view their handiwork, Ryder felt Abigail slip her hand into his. "It's perfect," she murmured, leaning slightly against his shoulder as they watched Robert run excitedly from one light to the next, checking that each was burning properly. "Not quite perfect yet," Ryder replied mysteriously. That night, after Robert had gone to bed, Ryder retrieved a small package from his saddlebags and found Abigail in the kitchen, preparing dough for the next day's baking. "I have something for you," he said, suddenly nervous. "Something I should have given you long ago." Abigail wiped her hands on her apron, looking at him curiously. "What is it?" Ryder handed her the small package wrapped in a handkerchief. "I bought this in Liberty before I left for the war," he explained. "I was going to give it to you the night before I departed. But then your father needed help with that broken wagon wheel, and by the time I returned, you'd already retired for the night. I decided to keep it with me to give to you when I returned." Abigail unwrapped the handkerchief slowly, revealing the silver locket nestled within. "Oh, Ryder," she breathed, lifting it by its delicate chain. "Open it," he encouraged softly. She did, revealing the tiny daguerreotype of a much younger Ryder, his expression serious as was customary for such portraits, but with a hint of the smile that had always come so easily to him in those days. "You've carried this all these years?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Everywhere," he confirmed. "Through battles and wilderness, across deserts and mountains. It was my talisman, my reminder of what I was fighting to return to." Abigail closed the locket gently, then held it out to him. "Put it on me," she requested, turning and lifting her hair to expose the nape of her neck. Ryder stepped close, his fingers brushing against her skin as he fastened the clasp. He couldn't resist placing a soft kiss just below her hairline before she turned back to face him. "I have something for you too," she said, reaching into her apron pocket. "I was saving it for Christmas, but now seems right." She handed him a small object wrapped in tissue paper. Ryder unwrapped it carefully to reveal a wooden carving of an apple, perfectly shaped and polished to a soft shine. "Robert and I made it together," Abigail explained. "He did most of the carving, but I helped with the finishing." "It's beautiful," Ryder said, genuinely touched by the gift and what it represented, a collaboration between mother and son, created with him in mind. "We thought you should have something to remind you of the orchard," she said. "Of home." The word hung in the air between them, filled with meaning. Home. After 15 years of drifting, Ryder had found his way back to the only place that had ever truly deserved that name. "Thank you," he said simply. Knowing she would understand all that those two words encompassed, she did. Rising on tiptoe, she pressed her lips to his in a kiss that spoke of forgiveness, of new beginnings, of a future they would build together. The days leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of preparation and simple pleasures. The tree was decorated with handmade ornaments, some from Robert's childhood, others newly created for the occasion. Presents were wrapped in brown paper and hidden in various locations around the house. The scent of baking filled the air as Abigail prepared traditional treats, with Robert and Ryder serving as eager taste testers. On Christmas Eve, They attended the service at the small church in Liberty. It was Ryder's first public appearance with Abigail and Robert since the revelation at the Harvest Festival, and he was acutely aware of the curious glances and whispered comments that followed them. But there were also warm greetings, handshakes from men who remembered him from before the war, and genuine welcomes from many of the townsfolk. Patterson was there as well, dignified in his Sunday best. He nodded politely to all three of them, his expression carefully neutral. After the service, he approached Abigail briefly, exchanging a few quiet words before moving on. Ryder, respecting their privacy, didn't ask what had been said, but he noticed that Abigail seemed more at peace afterward. The drive home in the sleigh was magical, with stars brilliant in the clear night sky and their breath forming clouds in the frosty air. Robert, seated between his parents, pointed out constellations he had learned from his grandfather, his excitement for the approaching Christmas making him more talkative than usual. Back at the farmhouse, they lit the luminarias once more, their warm glow creating a path of welcome through the snow. Inside, they hung stockings by the fire, one of Robert's Christmas Eve tasks since he was small. Abigail explained and shared a simple meal of soup and fresh bread before Robert reluctantly headed to bed. "Not too early tomorrow," Abigail cautioned with a smile as he climbed the stairs. "Let the sun rise at least." "Yes, Mother," he agreed, though his barely contained excitement suggested compliance might be a challenge. After he had gone, Ryder and Abigail sat together on the sofa before the fire, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm around her. For a long while, they simply watched the flames dance, content in each other's company without the need for words. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and find this has all been a dream," Abigail finally murmured, her fingers laced with his. "That you'll be gone again, and it will be just Robert and me as it's always been." "I'm not going anywhere," Ryder assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "This is real, Abigail. I'm real." She turned to face him, her expression suddenly serious. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Always," he promised. "Are you truly content here?" "With this life. It's not exciting or adventurous. It's the same routines season after season, year after year. After all your wandering, all the places you've seen. Will this be enough for you?" It was a fair question, one that Ryder had asked himself more than once over the past weeks. The answer, however, had never been in doubt. "What I've learned in 15 years of drifting," he said slowly, "is that new horizons eventually lose their luster when you face them alone. I've seen sunsets over the Pacific that would take your breath away, stood on mountaintops where the whole world seemed to spread out below me, ridden through canyons where the rocks glowed red at dusk. And in every one of those moments, my first thought was how much I wished you were there to see it with me." He took both her hands in his, holding her gaze steadily. "This life, this simple, honest life with you and Robert is worth more to me than all the adventures I've had or could ever have. This is where I belong, Abigail, with you, with our son. Home." Tears glistened in her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Then I have one more question," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ask me anything. Will you marry me, Ryder Calloway?" The proposal, coming from her rather than him, momentarily stunned him into silence. Then a smile spread across his face, wide and unrestrained. "Are you sure that's not supposed to be my question?" "I've never been one to stand on convention," she reminded him with a soft laugh. "Besides, I think I've waited long enough for an answer." "Yes," he said simply, reverently. "Yes, Abigail Hartwell, I will marry you, tomorrow, next week, whenever you want. Just say when." "New Year's Day," she decided. "A new beginning for all of us." Ryder sealed their engagement with a kiss that held all the promise of the future they would build together, a future that had seemed impossible just months ago, when he'd first ridden up to the orchard and found his first love picking apples once more. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, with sunlight sparkling on fresh snow that had fallen during the night. True to prediction, Robert was up with the sun, his excited footsteps on the stairs alerting Ryder and Abigail that the day's festivities were about to begin. The exchange of gifts was a joyous affair, with Robert receiving the new sketchbook and colored pencils he had been hoping for, along with a hand-tooled leather belt that Ryder had made during the evenings in the barn. Abigail was delighted with the warm woolen shawl Robert had saved to buy her, and visibly moved by the set of delicate hair combs Ryder had carved, inlaid with small pieces of mother-of-pearl he'd collected during his time near the Pacific. Ryder himself was overwhelmed by their generosity, a new leather-bound journal from Abigail, a hand-knitted scarf in his favorite shade of blue, and from Robert, a carefully drawn portrait of the three of them together, based on the boy's keen observation and remarkable talent. But the greatest gift came after the packages had been opened, when Abigail took Robert's hands in hers and said, "Your father and I have something to tell you." Robert looked between them, curiosity evident in his expression. "What is it?" "We're getting married," Abigail said simply. "On New Year's Day, if that's all right with you." The boy's face lit up with a joy so pure it brought tears to Ryder's eyes. "Really? You're staying for good?" he asked, directing the question to Ryder. "For good," Ryder confirmed. "If you'll have me as part of your family officially." Robert's response was to throw his arms around both of them, pulling them into a tight embrace that said more than words ever could. The wedding itself was a small, intimate affair held in the parlor of the farmhouse, with only a handful of close friends in attendance. The minister from Liberty performed the ceremony, his words about love lost and found again bringing tears to more than a few eyes. Abigail wore a simple dress of deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, with a crown of winter greenery in her hair. Ryder, in his best suit newly purchased for the occasion, found himself unable to take his eyes off her as she walked toward him on Robert's arm, their son beaming with pride in his role of giving away the bride. The vows they exchanged were traditional in form but deeply personal in meaning, each word weighted with the journey that had brought them to this moment. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in applause, none more enthusiastic than Robert's. The celebration that followed was warm and joyful, with music from a local fiddler, dancing, and plenty of Abigail's excellent cooking. As evening approached and the guests began to depart, Robert pulled Ryder aside. "I have something for you," the boy said, reaching into his pocket. "A wedding gift." He handed Ryder a small object, a whittled wooden figure of a cowboy on horseback, remarkably detailed for something carved by a 16-year-old's hands. "It's you," Robert explained, suddenly shy. "When you first came back, I saw you from my window, sitting on your horse at the top of the hill, looking down at the orchard." Ryder turned the figure over in his hands, moved beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift and what it represented. "It's perfect," he managed finally. "Thank you, son." Robert hesitated, then asked, "Would it be all right if I called you Pa instead of Father? Father seems so formal, and since you're staying now—" "I'd be honored," Ryder said, his voice rough with emotion. The young man nodded, satisfied. "Good. That's settled then." He glanced toward where Abigail was saying goodbye to the last of their guests. "You make her happy, you know, happier than I've ever seen her." "She makes me happy too," Ryder replied honestly. "You both do." Robert smiled, a hint of mischief in his expression. "Well, I'll be spending the night at the Willards' place, so you two can have some privacy." Mrs. Willard already invited me. Said newlyweds shouldn't have a teenager underfoot their first night. Before Ryder could respond to this surprisingly mature arrangement, Robert had moved away to help Abigail clear some dishes, leaving his father both amused and touched by his thoughtfulness. Later that night, after the last guest had departed, and Robert had been delivered to the Willards' neighboring farm, Ryder and Abigail found themselves truly alone for the first time as husband and wife. They stood in the doorway of what was now their bedroom, the master room that had been Abigail's alone until now. "Welcome home, Mr. Calloway," Abigail said softly, taking his hand and leading him inside. "It's good to be home, Mrs. Calloway," he replied, still marveling at the sound of her new name, at the reality that she was now his wife, that they had been given this second chance at happiness. As snow began to fall once more outside the window, they came together as husband and wife, their love deepened by separation, strengthened by forgiveness, and made all the more precious for having been lost and found again. Spring came to Montana with a gentle persistence, melting the snowdrifts and coaxing new life from the orchard's dormant trees. The apple blossoms opened in a spectacular display of pink and white, drawing bees from miles around with their sweet fragrance. For Ryder, Abigail, and Robert, the changing season brought new routines and shared responsibilities. The three of them worked side by side to prune the trees, repair winter damage to the fences and outbuildings, and prepare for the growing season ahead. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. On one such evening in late April, as Robert sketched the landscape before him and Abigail mended a shirt, Ryder announced an idea he had been considering for some time. "I've been thinking about expanding the orchard," he said, watching their reactions carefully. "That south slope gets good sun, and the soil is similar to what we have here. We could plant another 20 trees, maybe try some different varieties." Abigail asked with a smile, catching the way he had naturally included himself in the orchard's future. "If you're amenable," Ryder replied. "It's your business, after all." "Our business now," she corrected him. "And I think it's an excellent idea." Father always talked about expanding in that direction, but never got around to it. Robert looked up from his sketching. "Could we try some cherry trees too? Mr. Patterson says there's good money in cherries if you can get them to market quickly." The mention of Patterson no longer brought tension. The merchant had accepted the changed circumstances with grace, remaining a valued business associate while respecting the boundaries of their new family arrangement. "Cherries would be a fine addition," Ryder agreed. "And speaking of new additions," he glanced at Abigail, silently asking permission to share their news. She nodded, her hand moving instinctively to rest on her still flat stomach. "We have something to tell you, Robert," she said, her voice warm with happiness. "Come October, you're going to have a little brother or sister." Robert's eyes widened, his pencil forgotten in his hand. "Really? You're going to have a baby?" "We are," Ryder confirmed, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "How do you feel about that?" The boy was silent for a moment, processing the news. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "I've always wanted a sibling," he admitted. "Someone to teach things to, like riding and drawing." "You'll be a wonderful big brother," Abigail assured him, reaching out to squeeze his hand. As the conversation turned to possible names and preparations needed before the baby's arrival, Ryder looked out over the orchard, his orchard now. Their orchard, the trees silhouetted against the evening sky in neat, promising rows. How different his life was now from a year ago, when he had been a drifter with no real place to call home, no family to return to at day's end. Now he had not only regained what he had lost 15 years ago, but found something even richer, a family bound not just by blood and marriage, but by choice, by forgiveness, by the daily decision to build a life together. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Abigail leaned against his shoulder, following his gaze out toward the orchard. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "About how sometimes life gives you a second chance if you're brave enough to take it," he replied, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "About how grateful I am that I rode back to this orchard last autumn and found you picking apples once more." She smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the first light of the rising moon. "I'm grateful too," she whispered. Every day, from his place on the porch steps, Robert watched them with a contentment that had been years in the making. "The baby will need stories," he observed. "About how you two met, fell in love, lost each other, and found each other again." "That's quite a story," Ryder acknowledged with a chuckle. "The best kind," Abigail added, "the kind with a happy ending." As night settled fully over the valley, wrapping the orchard in darkness until dawn would bring another day of work and growth and possibility, the three of them remained on the porch, bound together by love and hope and the promise of seasons yet to come, seasons they would face together as a family. For Ryder Calloway, who had once left everything behind in search of something he couldn't name, the journey had come full circle. He had returned to the old orchard and found not just his first love picking apples once more, but a home, a family, and a future richer than any he could have imagined. And as apple blossoms drifted on the evening breeze like snow in springtime, he knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found where he was meant to be all along.